The hum of the freighter's old engines filled the air, low and steady like a distant storm rolling beneath their feet. Inside the dimly lit cabin, 5 figures stood gathered, faces drawn and hollowed by years of drifting between war zones and forgotten edges of the galaxy. None of them spoke, but the silence between them wasn't unfamiliar. It had been earned through too many battles, too many jobs where questions were the first thing to get you killed. The message had come in quiet, slipping past security like it belonged there all along. No sender. No official seal. Just a string of cold coordinates and a name that felt like a ghost, Veora Prime. Reese stood at the console, one hand resting loosely on the control panel, eyes scanning the message without emotion. He had heard of Veora Prime before, long ago, in the way you hear about places marked red on star charts. A colony that once thrived, built to be the jewel of outer systems, self-sufficient, shining, perfect. Until the day the colony stopped sending signals. No distress call. No warning. Just silence. After that, no ships returned. No answers. Eventually, the charts marked it abandoned, and no one mentioned it again. But now, 2 centuries later, a signal had come back. Faint. Repetitive. Almost like static, but too patterned, too deliberate. And with it, the message. We never left. Reese didn't bother asking why they were hired to investigate. The credits were heavy, enough to buy questions away. Around him, his crew moved automatically, checking weapon systems, running diagnostics, loading crates of supplies. Their faces told the same story: mercenaries who had seen too much, survived more, and learned not to trust anything but their own instincts. Lena, sharp-eyed, ran her hands over the scanners, double-checking the route, though she knew the ship had flown this way countless times. Juno, silent as ever, methodically secured the engine room, her fingers moving over ancient metal like a surgeon stitching wounds. Mark, the youngest, lingered by the viewport, watching stars stretch across blackness, something restless flickering behind his eyes. And Talon, broad-shouldered, leaning in shadows, polishing his weapon without looking up. No words passed between them as the ship detached from the station and slid silently into the void. The hyperspace jump initiated, and the stars outside warped, bending into impossible shapes. The freighter groaned but held steady. Somewhere beneath the steady thrum of machinery, another sound vibrated through their comms, soft, broken, pulsing like a distant heartbeat. It was the signal. Repeating. Steady. Endless. Captain Reese glanced once at the message on the screen, then turned away without a word. He didn't need to wonder who or what was waiting on Veora Prime. He only knew one thing. They would find out soon enough. The journey through hyperspace felt longer than it should have. Outside the narrow viewport, the stars stretched thin like threads pulled too tight, twisting into colors that didn't belong to any known spectrum. Inside, no one spoke. The soft vibrations of the ship's hull echoed through the silence, steady but uneasy, like the freighter itself knew where it was going, and wasn't pleased. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, the void gave way to something heavier. Before them loomed Veora Prime, floating in orbit like a wound left open too long. The planet's surface was wrapped in thick, gray clouds, layers folding over themselves in slow, unnatural spirals. No satellites. No traffic lanes. Just a forgotten world spinning quietly beneath the weight of centuries. The crew adjusted course, steering toward the last known coordinates of the colony. As they descended, the turbulence hit almost immediately, sharp jolts shuddering through the freighter, instruments flickering sporadically. Lena cursed softly, recalibrating, but the readings made no sense. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating wildly, magnetic fields twisted, Power surges where none should exist. The clouds swallowed them whole. Visibility dropped to nothing. For long moments, it felt like flying blind through smoke. Then, as if peeling back a layer, the clouds broke apart and the city emerged. Black towers rose from the ground like broken teeth, their edges crumbling, surfaces scarred by time and something else less explainable. The structures sprawled endlessly, stretching far beyond what colony records had shown. Metal spires fused with stone in unnatural patterns, sharp angles bending the skyline into something jagged and wrong. Streets lay empty, covered in dust thick enough to choke, littered with debris left as if people had simply vanished mid-step. They brought the ship down near what appeared to be the city's center, a clearing surrounded by monoliths that leaned inward, casting long shadows across cracked pavement. No movement. No heat signatures. No life. But through the silence, the signal thrummed louder, vibrating faintly beneath their feet even before they stepped off the freighter. It wasn't random. It was patterned. Deliberate. A heartbeat deep beneath the surface, steady and waiting. Captain Reese stood at the ramp's edge, eyes scanning the skyline, his breath caught somewhere between suspicion and something colder. The others followed, weapons ready, boots crunching against the dead ground. The air smelled faintly metallic, thin, like oxygen stripped bare. Lena glanced at her scanner again, brows drawn. No life detected. No power sources. Yet the signal was close. Strong. Growing clearer with every step. The city around them loomed like a carcass left untouched, but something about the silence pressed against their ears, too heavy, as if sound itself was being swallowed by the buildings. No birds. No wind. Only the faint pulse beneath their feet. Steady. Unchanging. Like the planet itself was breathing. Waiting. They moved cautiously, steps slow, eyes scanning the silent city. The streets stretched unnaturally wide, pavement cracked and littered with debris, old transport vehicles rusted in place, doors half open, as if abandoned in the middle of use. Yet there was no sign of chaos. No scorch marks. No signs of struggle. Just absence. Everything left as though the people who lived here had simply stood up and walked away one day, leaving no reason behind. Above them, the towering spires leaned at strange angles, casting jagged shadows that seemed to shift subtly when no one was looking. The metal surfaces reflected faint glimmers, but the light was wrong diffused, bending unnaturally like the air itself was warped. Lena kept checking her scanner, frustration tightening across her face. The readings made no sense. No power grids, no energy sources, no biological life forms. Yet the signal they followed pulsed strong, unwavering, like it was coming from every direction at once. Reese felt the weight of the silence pressing against his skull. There was something suffocating about it, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of time. It felt like the city existed outside of it, frozen between moments, waiting for something to break the stillness. They passed walls marked with symbols, faintly glowing blue under layers of dust. Curved lines, intersecting shapes, patterns that looked mathematical but organic at the same time. Juno paused beside one, brushing her glove across its surface. The glow pulsed faintly under her touch, like a muscle contracting beneath the skin. Not human, Lena murmured quietly, eyes narrowed at the design. She didn't elaborate, but no one argued. Further ahead, they spotted an old terminal, cracked but faintly lit. Mark moved toward it, tapping keys, bringing faded text to life. The screen flickered, and a message appeared, simple, chilling. "We never left." The words repeated, scrolling endlessly down the screen until Mark shut it off with a curse. Reese exchanged a glance with Tellen, No orders needed. They kept moving. Every step deeper into the city felt heavier, like walking into a mouth slowly closing behind them. As night approached, the city darkened, but the shadows didn't behave naturally. The faint glow from the symbols provided little light. No stars above. No moon. Only the pale, constant pulse of the signal humming in their comms. They set up a makeshift base inside an abandoned administrative building. Walls curved strangely inward, windows covered with grime, offering no view of the outside world. Inside, dust clung to every surface. Papers scattered across tables, chairs left as if people had been sitting there only moments before. The crew arranged watches. Juno volunteered for first. She moved outside, standing quietly, rifle slung casually across her shoulder. Minutes passed. Then hours. When Lena went to relieve her, Juno was gone. No sound. No footprints. No sign she had ever been there. They searched. Flashlights sweeping across empty streets. Calling her name. Scanners useless, offering only static. But there was nothing. As if the city had swallowed her whole. No one spoke much after that. They regrouped inside, weapons kept close. Mark stared too long at the flickering terminal screen, its blank glow reflected in his wide eyes. And always, the signal pulsed beneath everything. Steady, patient, waiting. Sleep was shallow that night, if it came at all. The walls of the building seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, too quiet to notice outright but too present to ignore. The crews sat in uneasy silence, weapons within reach, glances exchanged but no words spoken. Outside, the city remained still, no breeze, no sound, only the constant pulse of the signal vibrating faintly beneath the floor. Lena's scanner kept blinking, lines of unreadable data scrolling endlessly, symbols fluctuating between known alphabets and something entirely foreign. She frowned, adjusting settings, but the readings refused to make sense. The signal's strength was increasing, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, faint traces appeared, energy signatures deep underground, irregular, rhythmic like a pulse. Without waiting for orders, Lena stood, her voice low but steady. "There's something below us." They moved out, navigating through side alleys choked with debris and past crumbling stairwells that led deeper beneath the city's surface. The walls down here were smoother, darker. Gone were the signs of human habitation. Instead, strange veins of metallic strands ran through the stone, pulsing faintly blue. The air felt heavier the further they descended. Sound changed, each footstep echoing unnaturally long, as if space itself stretched behind them. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, cavernous and silent. The floor curved downward in a spiral, leading to the center where something massive stood. A machine. Or something like a machine. Towering rings layered over each other, interlocked, some half buried in the floor, others rising tall like skeletal ribs. Pipes and conduits wound around its frame, disappearing into the walls. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't decayed. It was alive, moving subtly, components shifting in slow, deliberate cycles, almost like it was breathing. Lena stepped closer, scanning frantically. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It's still running." The others stood frozen, eyes fixed on the machine, unsure whether to move closer or retreat. The walls around the chamber were covered with symbols, those same glowing patterns, but now, they seemed to move, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the machine's motion. Reese approached slowly, boots crunching lightly against the smooth floor. He stared up at the rings, watching how they turned, never missing a beat. Something about the motion felt familiar, though he couldn't place it. Lena's scanner flickered violently. Suddenly, her eyes widened, breath catching. "It's not just a machine," she whispered. "It's a memory system. Something storing." Before anyone could process her words, the signal in their comms spiked sharply, the pulse matching the machine's beat perfectly. And behind their eyes, images began to flicker. The air inside the chamber grew heavier, dense like liquid, pressing against skin and bone. The machine's motion seemed to seep into the floor beneath their feet, vibrating softly, each pulse echoing in their chests like a second heartbeat. For a moment, none of them spoke. Their eyes stayed locked on the rings, turning endlessly, smooth, precise, too perfect to be old, too alive to be forgotten. Then, the flickering began. It started small, at the edges of vision. Flashes of places they couldn't recognize, corridors bathed in sterile white light, faces blurred and shifting, voices speaking in languages they didn't know. Reese blinked hard, trying to clear his sight, but the images didn't stop. They overlapped reality, thin layers peeling away, revealing moments that felt borrowed, stolen from minds not their own. Mark clutched his head, breath ragged, whispering something under his breath. His eyes darted around the chamber, unfocused. Lena's hands shook as she stared at her scanner, now useless, symbols scrolling across the screen faster than she could follow. Talon stood rigid, jaw clenched tight, fingers twitching against his weapon. It wasn't hallucination. It was memory. But not theirs. They felt the emotions too: fear, confusion, something hollow gnawing at the edges of thought. People running down corridors. Doors sealing shut. Voices crying out, then silenced. And over it all, the pulse of the machine, steady, relentless, like the ticking of some ancient clock counting down to nothing. Lena spoke, her voice thin, strained. "It's storing them, the colony. Their memories. Their minds." Her eyes met Reese's, wide with something close to dread. "They didn't leave. They are still here. Inside it." For a long moment, no one moved. The realization hung heavy, pressing like the air itself. And then, Mark staggered backward. His breath hitched, pupils dilated. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Before anyone could react, he vanished. Not in a burst of light. Not with sound. He simply unraveled, edges thinning, strands peeling away like smoke, dissolving into the pulse of the machine, as if the air itself swallowed him whole. Silence followed, thick and deafening. Lena took a shaky step back, her voice cracking. "It's pulling us in." Reese stared at where Mark had stood, his jaw tight, mind racing. The machine kept turning. The symbols along the walls pulsed faster now, synchronized perfectly with a rhythm in their ears. And something told him, it wasn't finished yet. The chamber felt colder now, though the air hadn't changed. The silence following Mark's disappearance clung to them like a second skin. No one spoke. Reese's gaze stayed locked on the empty space where Mark had stood moments before, as if staring long enough might bring him back. But there was nothing left, not a sound, not a trace, just the persistent hum of the machine weaving through the air like a whispered threat. Lena's breath came fast, shallow. Her eyes flickered to the walls, to the glowing symbols that pulsed steadily, indifferent. She reached instinctively for her scanner again, but the device trembled uselessly in her grip, numbers spiraling, data looping incoherently. Her voice broke through the stillness, thin, brittle. "We need to get out." Talon nodded sharply, weapon raised, scanning the shadows as if the darkness itself might swallow them next. Reese gave a tight nod, motioning them back toward the tunnel. But each step felt heavier than the last, as if the floor beneath them resisted, trying to keep them rooted. They retraced their path in silence, breaths short, eyes darting. The corridors seemed longer now, walls curving subtly inward. Reese couldn't shake the feeling that the space was changing behind them, rearranging when they weren't looking, closing off exits they thought they knew. Then Lena stopped abruptly, one hand pressed to her temple, her body swaying slightly. Reese turned, saw her face pale, eyes wide but distant. "I hear them," she whispered. "Voices." Inside. Talon reached out to steady her, but before he could touch her shoulder, Lena's form flickered at the edges, blurring like static tearing across an old screen. Her mouth opened, words caught in her throat but her voice fractured, breaking apart like glass. And then she was gone. No sound. No scream. Just empty air. Reese stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to run, but where? The machine's hum chased after them, the pulse matching the frantic thud in his chest. He and Talon exchanged a glance, unspoken understanding tightening between them. Only two left. And the city wasn't done yet. They didn't stop. Every hallway twisted into the next, corridors looping impossibly back, but the pulse kept pulling them forward, guiding rather than blocking. The symbols on the walls shifted faster now, lines spinning, folding in on themselves like breathing patterns. Finally, they reached another chamber larger than the first, the ceiling arching so high it disappeared into shadow. And at its center, floating above a tangle of cables and conduits, hung a black sphere. Perfect. Silent. Ominous. It pulsed in time with a signal, waves of energy radiating softly from its surface. Faces flickered faintly within the sphere, millions of faces, shifting, blurred, eyes empty. Reese felt his breath catch, a chill crawling down his spine. Talon raised his weapon, but the futility hung thick in the air. "This is it," Reese murmured, voice low. "This is where they are?" The colony hadn't died. They hadn't left. They had been absorbed. Stored. Their minds trapped inside the machine, their bodies forgotten, dissolved into data and memory, endlessly replaying fragments of lives long gone. The signal in Reese's earpiece spiked sharply, words bleeding through. "We never left." Talon's stance faltered, shoulders tense. Reese felt something tugging at the edges of his thoughts, images, sounds, emotions that weren't his. Memories folding into his mind, layering over his own, soft whispers coaxing him to let go. He fought the pull, but it grew stronger, more insistent. Behind them, the corridor trembled, the walls shifting like liquid, shadows stretching long. The machine wasn't content with what it had. It wanted more. The black sphere at the center of the chamber hovered silently, its smooth surface pulsing rhythmically, each beat vibrating through the solace of Reese's boots, through the marrow of his bones. Faces flickered faintly across its surface, millions of them transparent, stretched, their mouths open as if caught mid-sentence, but no sound came. It was as if every soul once alive on Veora Prime had been pulled into this single point, trapped in an endless loop, their memories stitched together, endlessly recycled. Reese stood frozen, eyes locked on the sphere. Somewhere deep in his mind, he felt something tugging, soft at first, almost gentle. Whispers brushed the edge of his consciousness, voices that sounded like his own, like his crew, like everyone and no one all at once. They weren't words, not really. Just urges. A pull. Telling him to let go. To become part of it. Beside him, Talon shifted, weapon lowering slightly. Reese turned just in time to see the hard edge fade from his eyes, his stance relaxing as if the weight of exhaustion finally broke through. "Talon," Reese called, sharp, but his voice barely echoed. Talon didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the sphere now, and Reese watched in horror as the man's form began to shimmer, edges softening, outlines blurring like smoke caught in wind. Talon! Reese barked louder, stepping forward, reaching out. But it was too late. Talon unraveled before his eyes, piece by piece, strands of light lifting upward, dissolving effortlessly into the black orb. No scream. No resistance. Just a quiet release, as though he'd simply given himself willingly. The chamber felt colder, emptier. And now, Reese stood alone. The machine pulsed louder. The walls themselves seemed to bend inward, narrowing, shadows thickening until it felt like there was no room left to breathe. He felt it then, the pull intensifying. Thoughts no longer his own pressing harder, fragments of memory he didn't recognize flashing behind his eyes. The colony, the people, the screams, the silence after. Everything overlapping, sinking into his mind like quicksand. And still, the signal whispered, endlessly repeating. We never left. Reese staggered back, forcing himself to look away from the sphere. His breath came ragged, pulse pounding in his ears. The urge to give in, to let himself fade, to stop fighting coiled tight around his thoughts, sweet and suffocating. But somewhere deeper, a spark flickered. He remembered the message. The job. The faces of his crew, now gone, pulled into something vast and indifferent. And he realized this wasn't just memory storage. It wasn't preservation. It was consumption. The machine wasn't alive. It was feeding. And it wouldn't stop. His gaze swept the chamber, eyes locking onto the old power conduits running along the walls, snaking toward the base of the sphere. Somewhere in the back of his mind, calculations clicked into place, just enough time, just enough charge left in his gear. Moving fast now, ignoring the weight pressing against him, he dropped to one knee, pulling open a panel on his wrist. Fingers worked quickly, setting timers, rerouting energy cells, overriding safeties. His vision blurred at the edges, but he forced focus, counting beats in rhythm with the sphere's pulse. The whispers grew louder, flooding his mind, but he kept his hands steady. He stood, the countdown ticking silently on his wrist, and turned one last time toward the sphere. For a moment, he saw faces again, faces he almost recognized. Mark, Lena, Juno, Talon. Others, hundreds, thousands. Caught mid-thought, mid-scream, mid-life. All of them waiting. And beneath the hum, he felt something vast and empty. He took one step back. Then another. And as the timer reached 0, the chamber filled with light. The ground trembled. The pulse faltered. Walls cracked. The sphere flickered wildly, its surface fracturing as the energy surged through its veins, tearing the structure apart from within. Reese ran, the corridors collapsing behind him, shadows twisting, the machine's dying hum chasing at his heels. He reached the surface just as the city shook violently, spires crumbling, the sky above flickering as if reality itself rippled outward. For a brief second, everything went still. Then silence. True silence. He stood there alone, beneath the pale, empty sky, the pulse finally gone. But as he turned toward his ship, something lingered. A faint whisper brushing across the edge of his mind, barely audible. We never left. Fade to black.